process of turning a wild beast into a delicious meal is mysterious and magical, yet somehow simple and practical at the same time. Doing it well requires first-hand experience, the wisdom of others, a touch of science, and a good dose of innovation. On this episode, I'll share a few recipes that hold little back. These dishes feature the muscle, bone, and connective tissue of wild creatures. These recipes are full of life, blood, and the grit of outdoor existence. I'm Stephen Rinella. To me, hunting isn't only about the pursuit of an animal. It's about who we are and what we're made of. I live to hunt and hunt to live. I am a meat eater. Primal cuts. From the joint to the bone, these are the parts of the animal that harken back to the most original forms of cooking. Hunt it, chop it up, and cook it. I do it a little differently than the early hunters did, but all in all, it's about as real as you can get. Today I'm going to show you 3 big game dishes that are all personal favorites of mine, and they all fall under an umbrella that I like to think of as primal cuts, meaning they're bone-intensive cuts where you're looking at it and you know that that thing got chopped out of some animal because the evidence of the animal's skeletal structure is still intact. And we're gonna cook things that utilize everything from the ankle to the ball joint off this leg. And the 3 dishes I'm gonna be doing can all be seen here. I'm gonna do a shank in a preparation called ossobuco, which is hole in the bone. The other thing I'm gonna do is a whole roasted leg. I'm gonna do it with a fennel-based dry rub, and we're gonna roast this whole leg just like this. Finally, I'm gonna show you how to take femurs and cut them into marrow bones. You might think of all this as beast to feast, because these dishes really accentuate and highlight the fact that this thing came off an animal. We're not hiding anything here. This is a meat eater's feast. First thing I'm gonna work on is the ossobuco because it takes the longest to cook. On that shank cut, there's a ton of connective tissue and a ton of sinew and stuff in there. The way you need to break that down is you need to braise it. So you're cooking it in liquid at low heat for a long, long time. So that's the first thing I want to get into the oven. To do it, I like to saw my shanks in about 1.5 inch thick pieces. So I'm gonna go like that. I'm gonna saw there, I'm gonna saw there, and I'm gonna saw right there. The saw doesn't like meat, it jams up the teeth. So take my boning knife, cut all the way around each disc that we're gonna be making. You can use an actual butcher saw on this, or you can use a hacksaw blade. The problem with a lot of butcher saws is the teeth are too coarse. They work good on big beef bones, but on game bones, they catch too much and tend to want to tear that bone. When I'm cooking ossobuco, I like to cook it in like a big Dutch oven, and I want to cut enough discs to cover the bottom of that Dutch oven in a single layer. Here, just to demonstrate the versatility of the dish, I have a number of shanks. We just did a mule deer shank. I'm doing a caribou shank, and I'm also doing a black bear shank, which is a great thing for black bear. Basically, it's from right here on the critter to right here on the critter. So I'm gonna go and cut and saw these, and at that point, I'm gonna have enough of these discs to make like a sizable meal for a number of people. Anyone who's ever tried to eat shank that wasn't braised very slowly is gonna be incredulous of me when I say that this thing is gonna become so tender that it's just gonna disintegrate and fall apart, but it really is. But I don't want that to happen necessarily all the way. So what I do is I use kitchen string to bind these pieces together. That way it remains distinct inside the pot, and it can be lifted out at serving time, and you can lay like this beautiful piece of bone and meat right on someone's plate without having the whole thing crumble around. And that helps it retain its shape. Before I start braising the shank pieces, I want to brown them really good. I'm going to brown them in rendered bear oil, which is a pretty good frying medium. You can see this stuff's quite a bit old now, but it's rendered out and just lasts. I put it in my freezer, it stays fine for years. So I'm going to melt a little bear oil in here. While the oil melts in the pan, I dust my shank pieces in salt and pepper and then dredge them in flour. You know, the dish ossobuco, I mean, it has variations that come from a bunch of different cultures. You know, I know in Spain they make something very similar, but ossobuco is Italian, it just means hole in the bone, because you're looking down on that piece in there. And they traditionally there will cook it and eat it on polenta, so that's what we're gonna be doing, is serving this on top of a bed of polenta. You can take the nastiest, rangiest old buck, and with enough time, under the right conditions in your oven, you're gonna cook that thing down where it's gonna be absolutely tender. But the same thing that makes these shank pieces almost inedible if you were to put them on a grill. You would not be able to chew this meat off the bone. Those same qualities, that connective tissue and that gristle and that sinew, are what makes this dish so like silky and rich once you do get all that broken down into like a liquefied jelly. After browning the meat, you can start on what will become the bedding for the primary ingredient. Dice your onion and garlic, then let them saute while you chop the rest of your vegetables. Some celery and carrot. So you can do a pretty rough dice on these vegetables because this is getting cooked so long in that Dutch oven that the vegetables are just gonna be like obliterated. They're just gonna be cooked down almost into the sauce. I have sage, thyme, carrot, celery, onion, and garlic. And I got everything cooked down. The carrots are getting a little bit soft. The onions are translucent. The garlic's very aromatic. I can smell the herbs coming up. And now I'm just patting this all down into a little bed. So now what I want to do is I want to take all my pieces of shank and just make a layer and rest them on that bed. This is crushed tomato. And I want to add some in, just kind of fill in some of the holes with crushed tomato. And that's going to help thicken that sauce. The next and last step is adding stock. You want to add just enough to bring it up to the top of the shanks. So that could go 5-6 hours. And during that time, I might need to now and then add a little more stock just to keep everybody submerged down. If it comes up too much, the pieces can dry out on top. I have the oven set at 300 degrees. Put it into the oven. Just let it do its thing in there. One of the skills that every hunter should develop is the ability to roast a whole leg of wild game. It's a simple and rustically elegant dish that never fails to impress. Preparing the meat, both in the field and in the kitchen, is a lesson in simplicity. The first thing I'm gonna do for the venison legs, I'm gonna prepare the dry rub. And this is a fennel-based dry rub. And this is gonna sound like a bold statement, but this is the best way I've ever had venison leg in my life. I'm not kidding you. This dish is invented by a friend of mine, Chef Matt Weingarten. And my wild game philosophy has always been, instead of looking the wild game books for my ideas, I go look at chefs who are doing like fun, crazy, innovative, exciting stuff and find ways to adapt what they're doing with beef and lamb and pork, but find ways to make it work with wild game. And so this is one of those dishes he's come up with. For the dry rub, I'm gonna add in about a 1/4 cup of salt, a few tablespoons of brown sugar, a few tablespoons of fennel pollen. I'm gonna put my few tablespoons of rough chopped thyme. And it's got black pepper, coriander, and juniper. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna toast these and bash them up before I add them in. What I like about that is, like, if you smell them now, you can definitely smell what's going on. But when you toast them, you'll fill the whole room up with the smell of those. You know they're ready. And also they grind easier when you do that, when they got a little toasting. And just do that. And I'll just know they're done when I'll start to smell them really strong. I mean, this place will smell like a potpourri pot. Then I know they're ready to grind up. This mule deer leg is perfect as a whole roast. It's off a young, tender, fork-horn buck. Okay, I'm gonna do my one last check over on this for little bits of grass and sagebrush. When I'm doing a dry rub on game meat, I like to splash it in oil and rub that oil around because it just helps things stick a little bit better. So it's just a little bit, just to make a nice sticky surface. Rub that. That just helps the dry rub bind. When I'm putting dry rub on, I start out by giving everything a nice even coat. Because I don't want to get like the upper half done and realize I'm running out and don't have enough to do it. So I'll just start out and be like, okay, I want to get everything once, like this. Then I start going in for a second coat as I move along. And with this blend, you want enough where you're really able to cake it on. And that salt in there is going to draw moisture out. So when it goes on dry, it's quickly going to become more wet and it's going to get a little bit crusty on there, which is what you want as that salt pulls moisture. You can almost watch it happen here. You'll see how it's just getting like a wet appearance. I'm going to roast this thing on top of a bed of vegetables. And what I'm going to use is just some whole onion, and I'm going to rough chop some whole onion and just throw them in here. Take a head of garlic, rough chop it. Get the bulbs crushed or cut in half. Throw that stuff in there. This is just the flavor pan drippings. Take a fennel bulb. Put some of the fronds in there. Take the end, you know, the bulb on the fennel. Like I said, this is gonna just work for our drippings. Then, because game meat's so dry, now if you were cooking a pork leg or something, I wouldn't worry about it because the pork leg's gonna have so much fat. Game meat's very dry. And to keep this stuff from just, you know, essentially burning up in the oven, I'm gonna sprinkle olive oil on this. I'm gonna lay my leg, just like so. And this is gonna go into a 425-degree oven. This roast will take several hours to get where it needs to be. I don't want to hover over it, but I'll check it as we move along. Meanwhile, I'm getting a little hungry. Despite everything I was saying about Primal Cuts being like, you know, meat with bone in them, you really don't get more primal than a testicle in my mind. More primal than a testicle in my mind. I would bring this down and share it with the guys that I'm cooking for, but it's just never gonna go far enough. There's inevitably gonna be guys that are real jealous they didn't get a slice, so I'm just gonna eat it myself. It's gonna be kind of like the cook special. I'm gonna trim him a little bit. He's ready to go. The only way I've ever cooked these from game is in butter. So do like butter balls, butternut, and a little red hot's good. As soon as it hits that heat, firms right up, it kind of puckers right up. It's almost like what you'd picture happening if he jumped into a cold lake. You could tell someone this is a wonton, and you might get away with it till they bit into it. Oh, burst. Just got too built up with pressure. Strangely, it has a very bacon-like odor and a nice texture. It's almost identical to thymus gland or mild kidney. Bacon-esque qualities to it for some reason I'll never understand. If you gave someone this, like I don't know how you do it though. If you could say it was something that it wasn't, and I don't know what that would be, they would love it until they found out what you're giving them. Think of how many of these things go to waste out in the woods every year is mind-boggling. It's common for backcountry hunters to bone out big animals in the field in order to cut down on weight. I do it all the time. But when I can, I keep the bigger bones in order to bring them home because I love what's inside of them. The first time I ever ate a marrow bone was I was with an old girlfriend of mine. We were in San Francisco and we were at a really expensive restaurant. And I looked at the menu and they had marrow bones on the menu. And I remember thinking like, what in the hell is a marrow bone? And I ordered that and I remember it was 15 bucks. And it was 3 little marrow bones like that big around with herbs sticking out of them in toast. And I scooped that marrow out and spread it on that toast. And it blew my mind. It was like if you could somehow combine the best steak with butter in a spreadable form, it'd be what bone marrow was. But this is a buffalo from Mexico. This is not a big buffalo, but you can see it's a sizable bone. You know, there's buffalo that are twice as big, easily. And then this right here, and to compare, is a venison marrow bone. This little guy is gonna have a little slug of marrow smaller than your pinky. This guy's gonna have a slug of marrow maybe the size of a middle finger. There's 2 ways I like to cook them. In camp, what I'll do is I'll just throw them right into a fire. Leave them in there for 10 or 15 minutes, pull them out, smack them with a rock, and get that big marrow slug out of there like that. At home, I like to saw them. What I'll do is I'll saw these guys into discs, and I roast those things, and I broil them on top, a little bit of coarse salt on them and an herb in there. They're beautiful. I mean, it really transcends what it is right now. Like, you would never have someone over your house and throw this on their plate. But once you turn it into like a diced up marrow bone, it's a pretty beautiful little thing. If you have access, the best way to do this by far is if you have a bandsaw. I used to use just a regular wood bandsaw on them and just clean everything real nice when I'm done. For now, just doing a couple of them, I'm just gonna use this saw, but it doesn't matter how you cut them. The same way when I'm doing the ossobuco, I like to fit tight. I like to get the bones in there in a tight fit because inevitably some of the marrow drips out and this keeps all the marrow, you know, it kind of like just bathes the bone in its own marrow. Like you can see here, this guy's starting to lose his already. See, like that's the uncooked marrow coming out right there. So I can put him back in his little house. When you're baking these, you don't want to do it for long. You imagine you're roasting a piece of meat, really. It's about that big around and that high. And if you put this thing in there for an hour and just forget about it, you're gonna have trouble and they're gonna be desiccated and just dried up little things. And it'll be like dry bones floating in a pool of melted fat. At this point, everything is in the oven and roasting away, and I have plenty of time to do some sides and garnishes. For certain dishes, there are sides that just make perfect sense. With ossobuco, it's polenta. And polenta is just made basically as water and pre-cooked cornmeal. So this is a bowl of polenta mix, and it's just one ingredient, cornmeal, is all it's in here. I got some water boiling. You just pour this stuff in, stir it around, let it cook through. And when it's done cooking, I'm gonna cool it a little bit and then roll it out into rounds or like little logs wrapped in plastic wrap, and roll that stuff out and let it chill. And once it chills, it sets up in a kind of a nice, like, it's almost like a gelatin kind of binding on it that really goes nice with the ossobuco. And then you can cut those discs and fry those discs, and then you serve it on top there. It's beautiful, and it complements it perfectly. Now that the polenta is finished, it's time to pull out the roast and make our pan sauce. After cooking, this dry rub is almost like a salt cruster. It's really crusty and nice on the outside. We're running about a 130 in the middle. It's gonna continue to cook for a while. If you know the crowd you're cooking for, this is never gonna go down with like super rare meat. I would cook it in the bone. I would cook it all the way to 140. That way you're gonna have well done on the outside, and you're gonna have like medium rare down around the bone. I wanna pull this guy off here now, just get him on a rack. So I'm gonna make my pan sauce with what's left in this pan. That's gonna cool, and I'm just gonna pour a bottle of wine, or roughly a bottle of wine, over the vegetables in here. It's gonna go right onto a burner. So now I'm gonna bring that wine to a boil and reduce this by about half, and then strain it. And this red wine sauce with that fennel is gonna be a sauce that I can serve on the side of the meat, or like drizzle it on the meat. A really good way to go, once you strain it and reduce it down until it's thick enough where you put a spoon in there, it coats the back of a spoon. Get it down to like a cough syrup consistency. A really nice touch, stir a little bit of butter in there when you're done, and then when you slice those nice slices of meat and you drizzle a little bit of sauce on top, it's just magic. These bones, we're just trying to get it to a spreadable point, and I can just take this thermometer and it's just like nothing. I mean, it falls in almost on its own. You see the tops of the bones are getting a little dry. That's a good sign too. If you let it go too long, the marrow will start to retract away from the bone walls and fall out. I like to do these guys just as simple as possible, just because it's such a cool and unique dish. Just take a little bit of herbs you have laying around and give them a little garnish. And that's just a nice little completely unnecessary touch just for aesthetics. As we say in the field when we're sitting around the fire after a MeatEater hunt, it's all over but the eating. But there are other folks who work on the show, editing and doing a host of other invaluable behind-the-scenes jobs who don't get to go out into the field. So I'm gonna bring this meal over to them so they finally get a chance to taste what they stare at all day long. We're here at lunchtime at the MeatEater gear room. Like, you can see a lot of our equipment in here, and the guys that work on the show are in offices spread around here. Now they're gonna come down and they're gonna get to sample some of the stuff that they see so much working on the show but never get to actually taste. And I'm gonna cut this leg up and start getting this going before mealtime here. And remember we were talking about with the thermometer that we were gonna have a whole bunch of different cooked temperature meats here. So you see right now we're getting into the well done stuff. If you're gonna slice your own leg up for eating, you never wanna slice like this unless you're cutting jerky. You wanna go cross grain. And the muscles in here run different directions. So as you're carving this up, you always wanna watch and make sure you're coming in cross grain on everything. Hey Steve, it's happening. How's it going? This is your guys' big chance to eat stuff that you've worked on so much.
So I've never had deer before.
So
maybe something.
That's just not right that you've never had deer before after looking at so many deer.
I know.
That's not crazily rare at all. We're gonna put a little dab of this on there. All right, then I'm gonna let you fix your own stuff down there. But like I said, do the polenta, dig out some of the meat, put it on there, and then don't forget the bone marrow. This thing is massive. It should be obvious by now that harvesting, butchering, and cooking wild game is hard work. Not unlike putting an episode of MeatEater together. And I'm glad to be sharing this food with the men and women who spend countless hours, alone and together, crafting our shows.
This is amazing.
What do you guys think the best thing is? I had to go back for seconds with it's the deer.
The regular deer.
Yeah, this is, to me, the best thing. It's like a, a nice fine steak, but I don't know, I guess there is something a little different to the flavor, but.
Like you feel like you know it wasn't beef.
Yeah. At the same time, it's like, I don't know, just as good. It's really tasty.
It's very much like really good roast beef with just like a slightly different flavor that's.
See, this deer is this deer was so young and innocent that he was allowed to hang out with the does and no one tried to beat him up.
It's thirds for me, so I'm definitely liking it.
So you like the leg roast?
Yeah, it's up my alley. But the osbuca was really good too.
Yeah.
Like that quite a bit. There's more of this.
For lunch, and this marrow is like, it's something that I like, I could see myself having maybe a couple times a year, but like.
You don't picture just going up to the vending machine at work and just.
No, I mean, I see you guys out.
Hitting the bone marrow, hitting the A3 for bone marrow.
Yeah, no, I mean, you guys out in the field.
The satisfaction of a meal like this is undeniable, both to the belly and also to something a bit more meaningful. I could have bought ingredients at the store and spent days cooking for these folks and been pleased with the results. But it's the story of these animals, of these hunts, that makes this food what it is. A meal that has heart and soul, that was born of love for the ingredients.